A groundbreaking procedure to treat one of the major causes of sight loss. Doctors at Moorfields Eye Hospital are using human stem cells to treat age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. If successful, it could transform the lives of thousands of people every year in the UK. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports. Vladimir Putin says Russia would consider conducting airstrikes against Islamic State targets if approved by the United Nations. President Obama and the Russian leader met for 90 minutes and agreed on the need for a political solution in Syria, but failed to resolve their differences on the future of President Assad. Mr. Putin described the meeting in New York as surprisingly frank. Barbara Pletusher reports. British World War II veterans have been awarded France's highest military distinction, the Légion d'honneur, at a ceremony in London. They're being recognised for their role in the liberation of Europe. Many were just teenagers at the time and took part in the D-Day landings in June 1944. President Hollande has promised to recognise every survivor who helped liberate France. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports. Islamic State militants in Syria have destroyed another part of the ancient city Palmyra. They've blown up a Roman arch which was almost 2,000 years old. So-called Islamic State seized the World Heritage Site in May. Since then, they've also reduced two famous temples to rubble. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. A 16-year-old schoolboy has died after being stabbed at school in Aberdeen. Officers were called to Cults Academy in the west of the city at about 1:30 this afternoon. Another pupil has been detained by police and is said to be helping officers with their inquiries. Well, our Scotland correspondent Fiona Stalker is at the scene for us now, and the boy has been named in the last few minutes. A man has been jailed in America for 23 years for shooting dead a British tourist, even though another man was convicted of her murder. This man, Robert Jones, was sent to prison for rape, robbery and the murder of Julie Stott, who was on holiday in New Orleans in 1992. But even though another man was later found guilty of her murder and linked to all the other crimes, Robert Jones is still behind bars. Even the judge at the time and police detectives believe he is innocent. The BBC's Alim Maqbool has this exclusive report on what has been called one of America's worst racially inspired miscarriages of justice in decades. Good evening. A 16-year-old boy has died after he was stabbed at school in Aberdeen. The boy, named locally as Bailey Gwynn, was attacked at lunchtime at Cults Academy. The school's head teacher said the staff and pupils were all totally devastated. The police have detained a 16-year-old. They say they are treating the attack as a murder inquiry. Lorna Gordon is outside the school now. Lorna. The Prince of Wales and the Prime Minister have attended a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral to mark the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. The battle was a decisive victory for an army of British, Dutch and Prussian troops against the forces of the French Emperor Napoleon. Tens of thousands of troops were killed or wounded in the battle, which settled the balance of power in Europe for a century. Well, Robert Hall is on the battlefields of Waterloo in Belgium. Robert. Essential repair work on the Palace of Westminster could cost around £7 billion unless MPs move out for as long as 6 years. That's according to a report into the state of repair of the palace, which is partly sinking and has asbestos and outdated cabling. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The future of Greece is hanging in the balance after the country overwhelmingly rejected the terms of an international bailout package. Eurozone leaders are considering their response to the referendum in which 61% of Greeks voted no. A summit is due to be held tomorrow in Brussels to discuss the crisis. Queues have formed once again at banks, which are expected to run out of cash in just a few days. Here, David Cameron held an emergency meeting with the Chancellor and Governor of the Bank of England. Chris Morris reports from Athens. With us about fires in Vauxhall Zafira B's. Andy Mikowski emailed to say his Zafira burst into flames on his wedding night. Michelle also emailed to tell us that her Vauxhall Zafira caught fire in April last year. Charles on email says his Zafira started burning
on the school run in March, and he says he and his daughter were lucky to get out. Marie on Twitter says her partner was lucky to get out. They thought they were the only ones until now. It's all until next Thursday at the earlier time of 7:30. From till then, goodbye.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. 4 of the 5 Britons who were killed during a whale-watching trip on Sunday have been named. Among them were a father and son who'd been on holiday on Vancouver Island. They all died when the boat sank seemingly without warning about 8 miles away from the small town of Tofino. Our correspondent James Cook is there for us now. James. At least 360 people are now known to have died in the earthquake that hit Pakistan and Afghanistan. Rescue efforts are being stepped up to try to reach those affected in remote areas where the impact of the quake is still unclear. Most people died in Pakistan and at least 2,000 were injured. The quake had a magnitude of 7.6 with the epicenter near the city of Faizabad. From Kabul, our correspondent Shaima Khalil sent this report. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Heavy snow has been falling across northern parts of the UK. Hundreds of schools have been closed and there's been widespread disruption to roads, rail and air travel. In Northern Ireland, motorists have been warned to stay off the roads. Manchester Airport has been closed for much of the morning as teams try to clear the runways. And the snow has even caused widespread disruption to the mobile phone network. We'll be hearing from our correspondents in the worst affected areas in a moment, but first Judith Moritz on the day's snow disruption. Well, in a moment we'll be hearing from our correspondent in Northern Ireland, Chris Buckler, but first to our Scotland correspondent James Cook, who's in Loch Maben. And how is it there? Some of our most serious illnesses occur when genes in the human body go wrong. So scientists are trying to develop a new generation of drugs that isolate, then treat the faulty gene. The drugs company AstraZeneca is leading the research, and as our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports, they're hailing it as one of the biggest developments in the area of biotechnology in decades. If you've ever walked into the main hall at London's Natural History Museum, there is one exhibit you will not have missed. This giant Diplodocus, which has towered over visitors for more than 3 decades. Now it's being replaced by the skeleton of a blue whale. Richard Lister explains why. President Bashar al-Assad has defended his actions and those of his military during 4 years of civil war. In an interview with the BBC, President Assad denied that Syrian forces had used chemical weapons or barrel bombs to kill civilians, and he insisted he was doing his duty to protect his country from terrorists. Since the conflict began, 220,000 Syrians have been killed in fighting between President Assad's forces and different anti-government groups. The conflict has destroyed entire neighbourhoods, forcing 9 million people from their homes. UNICEF estimates there are over 6 million children in urgent need of help, while more than 3.5 million refugees have crossed borders.